Essay. According to history, government is the solution. Conservatives are fond of saying, government is not the solution, it is the problem. Conservative advocates who have made this their mantra have made it their mission to get government out of the lives of Americans. Government intervention is seen as an impediment to economic advancement. And if the economy cannot advance, then the individual cannot advance. For conservatives, the government should be relegated to bench warmer and used only sparingly. They continually assert that government has always been inept in attempting to solve problems experienced by average Americans. Therefore, the solution is private industries and private citizens. But are these conservative-leaning sentiments historically accurate? I contend no. History bears out a different tale. American lives have been enriched when government has been at its most vigorous, and there is a plethora of evidence to prove this. Where do I begin? How about with the Founding Fathers? Before I begin this section of my essay, I would like to acknowledge that the Founding Fathers did not speak with one voice on the issues they encountered. There was a litany of topics which the Founding Fathers quarreled over. One such issue was the role of the federal government. Many founders were content with the limited role of the federal government under the Articles of Confederation. Such founders believed the less the central government interacted with the populace at large, the better. But the system of government established under our first Constitution would have ramifications. Throughout the 1780s, the United States experienced economic hardship, which left thousands upon thousands of Americans in economic straits. The young country faced low production and excess of unrelegated paper money, overbearing British practices, which caused fewer opportunities to export goods, and insufficient hard money supply. And the federal government could do little to force the states to act in unanimity to solve the economic crisis. In 1787, the Founding Fathers would rectify this problem. A new constitution was adopted, which gave the central government more authority over the states. George Washington, in a stroke of genius, selected Alexander Hamilton for his Secretary of Treasury. Immediately, Hamilton put forward several proposals in his report on the public credit and report on the establishment of a mint, which would eventually pass and bring economic security to the country. He would tackle foreign debts, domestic debts, debts owed by the states, taxation, creation of the national bank, and creation of a mint. As a result, the new government had power to issue currency, enforce tax policies, create tariffs, and regulate commerce. Despite obstacles of the naysayers, Hamilton was able to form a government capable of unleashing America's economic energies that would bring prosperity throughout the 1790s. This would not have been possible without a strong, active government with power to interfere in the affairs of Americans. Who knows what would have happened had not the Founding Fathers switched to a more authoritative central government. Next, what about the federal government's involvement in improving our highway system? As H. Nelson Jackson can testify, our highway system was an absolute mess in the early 1900s. Prior to federal government involvement, anyone trying to travel from California to New York encountered many obstacles, mainly muddy roads and confusingly labeled road signs. In the early part of the 20th century, a functional system of roads was not needed, but America was changing. Americans were in the budding stage of a love affair that would eventually blossom into a lifelong romance. Cars were becoming a common sight throughout the United States. Roads were needed, and the federal government would play a crucial role, which benefited Americans immensely. From 1916 to 1956, the federal government would pass a series of acts, such as the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916, Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921, Federal Aid Highway Act of 1925, and Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which had universal effects on traveling in the United States, and the common men and women of this country would be the direct recipients. The positive results of these acts were many. For instance, county roads were transformed from muddy, dusty trails to paved roads, which afforded farmers easier access to markets. Internal state roads were improved. Standardized routes were created throughout the nation, meaning uniform numbers and signs were used instead of named highways and colored bands on telephone poles. The construction of over 40,000 miles, which has reduced traveling across the United States from 2 months to 2 weeks. And better roads have quickened commutes between urban centers and suburbs. Because of the government, traveling in America would never be the same. Next, how about the Panama Canal? Traveling around Cape Horn and through the Strait of Magellan was extremely dangerous. Products were more expensive because of the extended time it took to travel from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The federal government invested heavily in a 10-year canal project. The result was a structural masterpiece in engineering. Equally important, the voyage from New York to San Francisco was shortened by 8,000 miles. The shorter, faster, safer route to the West Coast and to nations in and along the Pacific Ocean enabled those places to become more amalgamated into the world economy. The government proved this competence once again. How about the New Deal programs, which assuaged the plight of the downtrodden and brought millions of Americans into modernity? By 1933, the Tennessee Valley was in dire straits. Stress placed on the region by farmers left the region nearly barren. And to make matters worse, the valley was the home of nearly 3 million of the poorest people in America. Many had to forgo electricity and indoor plumbing. Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, was created in 1933 for the economic development of the region. Residents in 7 states would benefit from its effects. Over 20 dams were built to control flooding, improve navigation, generate hydroelectrical power, and increase agricultural production. Farmers were educated on how to improve crop yields. The government made available low-cost electricity, which dramatically changed valley life. Electric lights and appliances made life easier and farms more productive. Under the Public Works Administration, construction projects such as dams, bridges, and roads were funded, which would drastically change the entire country, especially the West. Rural Electrification Administration, REA, also had a dramatic effect on rural life. In 1930, only about 10% of the country outside cities had electricity. The Rural Electrification Administration aided farmers in bringing electricity into their communities. As a result, by 1941, 40% of farms had electricity. FDR's New Deal also created Securities and Exchange Commission, Social Securities, and Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The Securities and Exchange Commission has provided protection to public and private investors from stock market fraud, deception, and insider manipulation on Wall Street. Social Security has been responsible for pulling millions of older Americans out of poverty. Currently, Social Security is keeping 40% of all Americans over the age of 65 out of privation. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation has also been a godsend. FDIC restored confidence in an insolvent banking system. Before FDR, a bank failure could result in a customer losing one's entire life savings because banks only kept a fraction of deposits in reserve. FDIC was designed to make sure financial institutions are safe and sound. Initially, deposits were insured up to $2,500, a hefty sum in 1934. Today, deposits are insured up to $250,000. Since its creation, not one depositor has lost insured funds because of bank failure. I am willing to bet these programs have afforded Americans many restful nights. And, more importantly, I will bet America as a whole has been enriched by the government's big nature role. I could go on refuting the erroneous claims of conservatives who lambaste government for acting as the solution to our problems, but I believe I have provided enough evidence to show the absurdity of their arguments. In times of crisis, history bears out the facts that government can be the solution.